Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody. I'm TWB. As we continue the conversation about the explosion of sci-fi across the globe, a larger question remains: what's the social impact of the sci-fi phenomenon, specifically in terms of race and gender? Let's take a look.
Being with you, I can't tell what's right and what's wrong anymore.
It's better that way.
Run for your life!
The monsters and the doctor. It seems you cannot have one without the other.
How fast can you run? Because today is the day the human race throw you off their planet.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at war.
Today, I honour the victims first. His, the masters, the Daleks, all the people who died because of my mercy.
The Doctor lording it over us, assuming alien authority over the rights of man.
Planet Earth is at war.
Our best hope now is each other.
Tell me, who are you?
Doctor Who?
Doctor Who?
And we should say that Doctor Who actually is airing on Brew TV this May, so it's very exciting and very apropos. So let's talk about some of these marginalized groups that may be affected by sort of this surge in sci-fi. In terms of race and gender roles, have things changed in terms of the sci-fi genre?
Well, people who are marginalized have often been drawn to these genres, and especially the fandom we have seen that both men and women are just about equally represented in the fan groups. There has been a misconception for a while. It's mostly these are mostly male genres, but not so, because oftentimes you do see that within the very themes of so much science fiction and fantasy, you have the issue addressed that who are marginalized groups, why are they marginalized, and what keeps them on the outside, and their struggles to be accepted.
Okay.
I mean, you see this in the comic book world and films like the X-Men. The entire theme of all those, it's all about marginalization.
Right. Ken is nodding his head, but before we hear from Ken, I just want to introduce. We have two more guests joining us via Skype. We should have Deborah Stanish. She's the co-editor of the Hugo-nominated Chicks Unravel Time. I like that. There she is. Welcome, Deborah. And we also should have. Hello. We also should have Sheree Thomas, award-winning editor and publisher of Dark Matter, which specializes in African-American sci-fi. So, Sheree and Deborah, welcome to you both. Great to see you side by side.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is Sheree. Very good to talk with you all.
So Sheree, let's start with you. Tell us about the Dark Matter series, and how is that different from traditional sci-fi?
Well, Dark Matter actually came out in 2001, and it's different because it's a collection that's only has works by writers of African descent, and it includes works by W.E. Du Bois and some contemporary writers. So in that frame, we are the subject of the story, which is pretty different in science fiction as a whole. If you think about the golden era or the golden age of science fiction, women in particular and minority groups or marginalized communities were not necessarily the subjects, the heroines or heroes in the stories, if they appeared at all. So that alone is one thing, that we're the subject in a lot of the stories. Not all of them, but in a lot of them.
Okay. I want to bring Deborah into the mix. Deborah, I'm curious your take on sort of sci-fi past and present. How is that sort of broken down racial and ethnic stereotypes in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, it seems like this is a really interesting place where people can explore those boundaries. I was having a conversation today where you can have, in genre television, things that you cannot have in mainstream TV. Nobody questions the fact that you can have a woman Starfleet captain, where you would not have a woman president on, say, a mainstream television show, such as NCIS. So it gives both in gender and in different racial entities a chance to explore boundaries and explore power roles that you don't necessarily get in the mainstream media. Yeah,
exactly. Tell us about your book, Chicks Unravel Time. Did I get that right?
Chicks Unravel Time, yes. There was a wonderful book that came out in 2011, I believe, called Chicks Time Lords, which won the Hugo that year for Best Related Work. And that was an exploration of female fandom within Doctor Who universe. And what we did with Chicks Unravel Time, which I was a co-editor along with Ellen Miles, is we took that a step further. And what we did is we got to gather together a group from across the globe. It is a very global sort of project of women science fiction, fantasy writers, media professionals, bloggers, fans and professionals, and academics, and asked them to look at an individual series of Doctor Who through their own perspective and pick one aspect or sort of a flavor of that particular year and write about it from a female perspective. Women tend to bring something different to the table, not just in creating science fiction, but how we ingest science fiction. So we cover every ism that there is in Chicks Unravel Time, but it also is a way for us to look at the 50 years that have transpired since Doctor Who came on the air and all the sort of socioeconomic changes that have occurred, and do it in sort of an amusing way, but definitely through the life experiences of women who were watching it.
Terrific. Sheree, I want to get your insight for a moment. Aside from sort of racial and ethnic barriers, how do you think sci-fi speaks to sort of the outsider or maybe the misfit in general?
Well, for one thing, it kind of throws that on its head a little bit. We're often, African Americans in particular in this country, are often discussed as the outsiders looking in because they are a minority population. But if you think about their impact on our culture, for example, our music, if you want to define American music, well, the first forms of music that are defined as American are actually contributed by African Americans. So we may have like a small physical, footprint in the world, but the impact culturally and politically and socially is pretty large. And when you're supposedly on the outside looking in, you are on the inside, and you've had to be out of survival, had to become versed in what the majority culture is, the survival techniques you need to survive in that, as well as manipulating the nuances of your own. So you're kind of this, it is a science fictional state in a way to be a marginalized community in America.
Right.
And there are lots of different groups who have written works from that point of view, that we're on the outside, but we're actually on the inside in a way, and can give insights about our country that we're in, from a perspective that could probably benefit all of us.
And when you think about sort of iconic figures, Star Trek, there are definitely some African American characters that stick out. I just wanted to open it up to the panel a little bit. Ken, specifically, other characters, storylines that have become popular related to the marginalization in sci-fi?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about science fiction for people of color, as well as now we're bringing the female perspective into science fiction, which is fantastic. This is something 30 years ago that we wouldn't have seen.
Not interrupt you, but we're looking at a very famous image.
Michelle Nichols.
Fantastic. And what's interesting, I should point out, is even if you're not a fan of sci-fi, you know that woman, you know her face, and you may say, how do I know her? But you know her, and I think that speaks volumes of sort of the power of the sci-fi genre and the escalating power of it. So who are some other sort of big figures and characters we can all...
Well, Torchwood introduced us to lesbian, gay, transgendered characters as well, and it's a show that broke new ground there as well. These are all groups that are now having their say in science fiction, and rightfully so. It's fantastic. Science fiction is about being open-minded. The starting point for science fiction is that open-mindedness, is that possibility, all those possibilities being endless. And this is an example of it. This is an outcropping.
Didi, what do you think?
Well, I love Lieutenant Uhura. I just want to say, because
who do you love?
Lieutenant Uhura.
Oh, right.
Because she's a black woman, strong, and anytime she said anything on Star Trek, everyone turned and watched. I loved her, and I loved her outfit too. But anyway, and then you had Queen Amidala on Star Wars, who, she got it done as well, a very strong woman, and then Captain Janeway at Star Trek. So I just think it's good in these science fiction and these alternative worlds where, hey, if you're a little bit different, if you're a woman, if you're black, you know what, you can be the captain of the ship and you can be the person that's in charge, and that is a good. And I think with these conventions and the parties and the gatherings, these are folks that maybe can identify with one another. They have something in common, and they're able to be stronger as a group, and makes them stronger as individuals.
Deborah, let's go to you for a moment, just off of what Didi was saying. Who do you identify with most?
I really enjoy flipping some of the gender tropes around and look at shows that have really sort of changed the landscape, such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which took the idea of that little blonde petite cheerleader and had her be the hero, had her be the warrior. Xena Princess Warrior did the exact same thing. She was the warrior of that particular show. She was the lead character. And even in looking at something as modern as the Avengers, you have Maria Hill as being in charge, and you have Black Widow as being a fantastic character who is just just empowered on her own. She does not have superpowers. She hasn't been bitten by anything. She doesn't have a magic suit to wear, but she is fierce, and she is a lead character all on her own. And I think they're kind of taking the idea of femininity, because these are all characters who are not only they're taking the lead, but they're doing it in a way that that's kind of subscribing to perform gender roles and yet doing it in their own terms.
Right, and we should just say that it was interesting when Buffy the Vampire Slayer came out. I remember it was based on that movie. I don't know if it seemed like a campish movie to me. I don't know if it did that well, but it's amazing the longevity that this series had, because if you were looking at the outside in, this was Sarah Michelle Gellar, the cute little blonde, but what Deborah said, this is really about what it stood for and sort of this female empowerment and everything that this character encompassed. This wasn't just a little blonde girl that we could all say is pretty. She really stood for a lot, and I think Buffy actually changed the landscape of sci-fi and TV as we know it in the millennium.
I'll take it a step further and say that Agent Scully in the X-Files.
Yes.
There was a woman who was
Gillian
strong
Anderson,
and
right?
smart. She was respected by all her peers. That's so important, because these are not marginalized characters. This is a person who is interacting with other people, and young girls who are growing up were watching a character like that saying, I can go be a doctor, I can go be an FBI agent. These are important roles that I can have. I don't have to be in any traditional set. And Sigourney Weaver in the Aliens movie, another one who was a strong,
she was tough.
Right? There was a
right?
case of it. She was a strong female character. And when the first movie came out, no one knew that it was going to be the female that was going to be the last survivor.
Right, wasn't that a nice surprise? Yeah. Tell us more about Doctor Who, though, because this is a doctor that really fights for justice.
Absolutely. Doctor Who it's my favorite show because it can go anywhere.
I know you're a little biased.
I'm very biased on it, and I know Deb is as well as a Doctor Who fan. It represents so much. It's a positive thing. It's the energy is positive. The role of the Doctor is someone who is your traditional hero archetype, someone who's going to be saving the universe, fighting for truth and justice and all the other things that we remember from comic books and legends.
Right.
And stuff.
Barna, what do you think? I mean, about the Doctor sort of, fighting for the underdog, and just the general, thoughts behind that?
I'm fascinated by how a character like that, and many have said that's a very typically British character, that he's not the traditionally brawny, square-jawed, broad-shouldered characters. He's a little more, seems more cerebral. The Doctor, more British. Almost himself is more of a representation of someone who's the outsider, who doesn't have the traditional appeal that most heroes do.
Yeah, and isn't going to use weapons. He tries to use intellect instead of kicking down doors and grabbing a gun. He's trying to think his way out of the situation. And I think that's a great message for young people as well. I remember being a kid watching the show. My attraction to the show when I first watched it, being that it was a British show, was it didn't look like Knight Rider or the A-Team or any of the other shows on TV.
Right, you got to look at the landscape. Hold that thought. I do want to go back to Sheree for a moment. Sheree, from your perspective, who are some of your favorite role models? The rest of the panel has weighed in. I'm curious your perspective.
I have a kind of different perspective. I'm not really into television as much and movies, and I know the conversation's been mostly on that and more into the literature. But if I were going to take it to like obviously the franchise, I'm thinking about when Avery Brooks was the leader of the Starship and everything, and that was pretty significant. Or Alfred Woodard, a lot of movies that were coming out in the late '90s, early 2000s. Alfred Woodard and Angela Bassett as
I think we've lost her, but she was talking about Alfred Woodard and Angela Bassett. Does anyone want to finish up? Anyone want to pick up where we lost her?
Star Trek broke new ground right from its origins in the mid '60s with having an African American character on television.
How big of that was a
huge.
big deal? I mean, put that into words for our viewers who weren't around back then.
It was the '60s. It was the heart of the civil rights movement, and here you have an African American woman being on television, being treated as an equal, an officer on what is essentially a Navy vessel. And
on every scene, she was always there.
Always there. But still being feminine, still being interesting. I mean, all of these things that she can still have a complex character. There wasn't a time where she was marginalized or looked down upon. That simple symbol And then after that, with I Spy, with people like Bill Cosby being on television, these were enormous things. These were messages that in our at the time were
they were
very weighty.
I want to go back to Sheree for a moment. Sheree, we have to wrap up, but what's your final thought, real quickly?
Well, when it comes to science fiction, it's about what if. It's about speculating on what the future may be, but it's actually a commentary about what we're doing right now. And the reason why I feel like it's so important for communities of color around the world is that when you're talking about genetically modified foods, and you're talking about things like that, they're mostly happening to nations that are considered third world. Those populations are the ones that are being impacted by it the most. And so it's really interesting to have stories, novels, written from people from that point of view. I'm thinking of Nnedi Okorafor, a Nigerian American writer, who's talking about issues like rape being used as a tool of war. And child soldiers. I'm thinking about Octavia Butler, who's one of the pioneers with Samuel Delany of science fiction, and putting women as the leaders in the stories, in those stories. I'm thinking of Nisi Shaw and Tananarive Due and Stephen Barnes, who are taking these things. Walter Mosley did a whole collection of short stories called Futureland, on which he's looking at like the prison industrial complex and how that affects black men in America. So
there are real large issues that really we could get to. I don't mean to cut you off, but we could. I wish we could have you here in the studio for the entire show, because your insights are certainly unique and eye-opening and fascinating. But I want to thank you for your time. I wish we had more, but come back, okay?
It's great that we're talking about this.
All right. I want to move over to Deborah real quickly. Deborah, are you there? I just need a quick final thought from your perspective.
Looking at Doctor Who in particular, since that's what I've most been immersed in recently, it's a show that covers every single genre, and it does so in ways that you don't know what you're getting from week to week. But over its history, it has introduced such a variety of female characters that have been role models, that have worked within very prescribed toolboxes that they've been given, whether it's based on what is happening culturally at the time, and they've managed to transcend that. And part of that is the actors and the writing that's going into that, but it's also the general sense that you don't have the same boundaries in science fiction and fantasy that you do in mainstream media television, and you're allowed to play with those roles, and you're allowed to push those roles. And even though it may seem at times the society around you is constricting, they've really managed to, in this particular genre, take something that may have initially been a little bit more sedate and made it something new and made it something interesting.
Yeah.
And I think science fiction in general, that is the beauty and the joy that this particular genre can bring to these societal changes.
Excellent insights, Deborah Stanish. Want to thank you for your time again. Wish we could have you in the studio for the whole show, because it really is interesting from your perspective, and curious to see where sci-fi goes from here. Sort of sky's the limit. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, coming up on Fresh Outlook, more sci-fi. We're tackling the fandom phenomenon. That's next on Fresh Outlook. Stay with us.